All right, in today's video, we're talking all about mixing the mid-range. Now, I had a great comment asking me my opinion on the magic is in the mid-range, so I thought I'd weigh in and give my 2 cents on it. And yes, the mid-range is super crucial because all of the guitars and piano and vocal all live there in the mid-range, so that's where all of your chord progression and all of your melody is. So really the heart of the song is in the mid-range. But I think what is meant by that phrase is if you get the mid-range right, it'll translate well across any playback system. So if your mid-range is in balance with itself, it'll sound the best whether it's in the car or on a home stereo system or even on an iPhone. Because if your mix is too dependent on the low range or the high range for its character and the mid-range isn't properly balanced, then you're going to have translation issues on different playback systems. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's get into it. So a lot of mix engineers invest in NS10s, and they do a lot of their EQ work on speakers that are really highlighting the mid-range and don't have very much low and high-end response. And a common workaround for that is to duplicate that on your master bus with an EQ. So you're doing a low shelf and a high shelf to roll off your lows and highs, leaving your focus strictly on the mid-range so you can do some fine-tuning work there. And I have found this really useful as a reference, but let's dive into that and take a look. So a common method for that is to use a parametric on your master bus and just do your low shelf and your high shelf somewhere around the low mids and high mids and leave yourself with just a range that you're listening to reference in your mixes. And some people suggest rolling off at 300 hertz or 400 hertz, and some people as low as 3K or up to 5K. I do use this method and I do find it useful, but I don't spend a lot of time in here mixing. And I will also roll the low and high shelves around. I won't stick with any one strict setting for any length of time, but I have heard that people get a lot of benefit out of that. But if you've never heard of this method, let's take a listen to this mix. And then when I bypass the EQ and it comes back, then you'll hear it just in mid-range. It'll kind of have that telephone effect. Now, with all the lows and highs gone, what you're really left with is the heart of the song that needs to translate well across multiple systems. So this is a really useful method, but it also can kind of play tricks on your ears, for me at least, so I can't spend too much time here. I will use it as a reference the same way that I don't mix in mono for extended periods of time, but I use mono as a reference. But yes, you can flip into just your mid channels and make sure that things aren't peaking out too far and other things aren't too buried. Because having the lows and the highs going all of the time and so much of your focus being on cleaning up lows and getting nice crisp highs, it is easy to lose sight of the mid-range. So this is a technique that I do recommend. It's at least worth trying and see if it helps you. But I do think there's a better way than this. Now this plugin is called ISOL8 and it's by Tone Booster Pro Audio, and this is a free plugin. And this plugin is really cool because you can set all of your crossovers and it gives you control over your lows, your highs, and your mid-range is split up into 3 sections. And it also lets you solo out left, right, mid, and side. This is really cool because this also gives you a great way to easily click on just your lows and then possibly your low mids so you can hear the mud versus the subs. And same thing, you can hear the balance between your low mids and your high mids. If you've watched my video called Everything Affects Everything, it largely focuses on that relation between the low mids and the high mids, and how if you do one thing in the low mids, it affects the high mids and vice versa. At least affects the way we perceive them. But this plugin is super useful. I just keep it on the master bus and I mix for a little while, make some moves, and then hop in here and check certain frequency ranges soloed out. Just like I frequently change my playback volume, I'll listen to the mix quieter, turn it up louder, and you just kind of change it up often as you go. Now, apparently people are spending a lot of time mixing in just the mid channel, and what I find is when you do that, your ears start to compensate over time. At least my ears do, and I actually don't think it's constructive for long periods of time, but I totally give it a try and see what you think if you've never tried this. Yeah, but this little plugin, ISOL8, is free and it's really cool. So now I have the crossover set at 200. So this is where you can define the separation between the bands. To me, the low mids start somewhere around 220, 250. It kind of all depends. And now we're listening to just the mids. So everything from 200 hertz to 5K. Take this up to about 300 and lower this to about 4K. If you've never tried this, I bet you can hear how this can be useful. If there were a vocal going, all of the enunciation would be right around in this range, especially if I raised it up to 5K in the sibilant range. I would be catching almost all of the vocal except for the high stuff. And there would be low stuff down at 200 and even 100, but the vast majority of the vocal would be in here. So if I wanted to balance these guitars and the piano with the vocals, it can be useful to get rid of your lows and your highs and just focus on the mids to make sure your balance is what you think it is. And then you could switch back and turn everything back on. Now, I also do recommend if you're going to spend a lengthy period of time just in the mid-range with your lows and your highs turned off, it's useful to step away for a few minutes there before you just bounce right back in, because your ears have to readjust really quick. And so this is between the 700 and the 2000 here. And if I add the high mids in, now we're going between 700 and 5K, 570. So this could be useful for a lot of things. You can hone in specifically on the sibilant range so you can get a gauge on what else is going on up there. You can also just do the low mids and the lows so you can compare your subs with your mud. You could just solo out the low mids so you could just hear the mud. I found this useful in the past too because I've made mistakes mixing where in an effort to reduce so much low mid to preserve the high mids and the highs and make the lows stand out, I've ended up finishing songs before where I've actually taken out too much of the low mids. Here you can hear what a mix sounds like real easily and quickly with no low mids. So that's the full mix, but with the low mids taken out. And bring them back in. And as soon as you bring them back in, it might sound really boxy for a minute because your ears were already starting to compensate. Yeah, and if you take the high mids out, you can see how much clarity in your vocal is actually there or how much your guitar solo is cutting through without the high mids. That can be useful as well. And simply having the mid option and the side option is very helpful too. That's just the mids. And that's just the sides. But as far as the magic is in the mid-range goes, I think that's what they mean by that, is you have to nail the mid-range. You can't be so focused on the lows and the highs that you lose sight of the fact that the mids is where everything is happening. And you do have to get the mids right, or all the time you spend on the lows and the highs ends up being kind of pointless in the end. So this is a great tool. And again, I just do it in reference. I don't mix here long periods of time, but if you've never tried it, go ahead and try it. But I think the real big takeaway here is sometimes we can get lost focusing on the lows and on the highs and just kind of lose sight of what it really means to have everything balanced in the mid-range. So one of the things I like to do when I'm first setting up a mix is set the faders in a general volume. Just get a general sense that my lows are in the ballpark compared to my highs and compared to my mids. And before you do any real in-depth EQ work, it helps to get that general structure. And then you might find that it helps you then to go hit the mids hard and maybe use this tool to isolate them out a little bit here and there and make sure that your mids are balanced. Make sure your guitars and your keys and your vocals and stuff all sound good, EQ'd against each other in just the mid-range so you're not fooled by the lows and the highs that are going on. And then you can go to work on getting your lows punchy, and then you can fine-tune your highs and make sure that they're not shining too bright or too dim. But yes, I do recommend this as a good tool. Some people take it way further than others, but I definitely think it's something that if you haven't been referencing, you probably should at least give it a try. Solo out all of your mid-range and spend a little time there while you're doing your EQ work, and I really think it'll help you out. Because if you've ever been in that situation where your mix is sounding great, but you pop it on a small set of speakers or a phone or maybe a car that doesn't have that great of a stereo, and you're like, wow, my vocal's way quieter than I thought, or that one guitar is way louder than I thought it would be, and it's just not translating well to other systems, then this could totally help you out. If the mid-range sounds good without any lows and highs, the odds that it will translate to other systems are greatly increased. If you've never tried it, give it a try. It's definitely a good technique. But thanks again for leaving that question in the comments. It's a great question. And let me know what you think in the comments. Hit me up and tell me what your techniques are for mixing the mid-range. I'd love to hear about it. And if you got anything else you want me to cover, hit me up, and I'll catch you on the next one.